really about the balance between difficulty and marketability of your games. A lot of the games that you mentioned earlier that were your favorites, and for me also, were games that were very difficult, and they operated in a realm where there wasn't a lot of other options. If you didn't want to play EverQuest, there was other options, but I mean, really, EverQuest was the elephant in the room. And I guess now there's a lot of other players, and I wonder how you deal with the marketability of your game while not compromising and making it, you know, like adding an E in the MMORPG, massively easy multiplayer. You know, and I see a lot of games now that have no basic learning curve, and it's just like push one key to level once, push the other key to level twice. And I mean, I guess I just want to hear some of your thoughts on how you're combating that, because, you know, I think it's important that these games have longevity and that they're meaningful to people, and I don't see how they can be if they're really
we'll start with
easy.
Yeah, we'll start with Matt down here.
Well, I mean, in our game is all about PvP. So it inherently, the difficulty curve is based on the competitive nature of the game. You're playing against other people. Some of them are going to be really good, and it's going to be really hard for you to fight against them. But then you're going to get better by playing the game. It's not like there's a lot of crazy interface you need to learn, or how does this convoluted game system work. You know, there's more to something being hard to learn than just how complicated it is. A lot of it is really simple stuff, but it's hard to learn because you have to get the muscle memory right. If I'm firing a gun, what's my tapping rate to make sure that I'm not getting any drift on my shots, you know? That kind of stuff is something that you're learning, but you're learning it without having to put the time into really trying to figure it out. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? And I think that that's the way that if you're making a great game, it's something that you don't even realize you're learning how to get better at it. You're just getting better at it because, you know, the game is fun, it's teaching you things as you're playing it, and I think most really great games throughout history kind of operate that way. You get better because you're playing against other people, or you get better because you're playing it enough that it's just becoming something you can do. I mean, Kurt probably threw a lot of baseballs before he got really good at throwing baseballs, and that, you know, that's part of how you can make games be difficult but not be complicated.
Yeah, I think in terms of MMORPGs, personally, I hope it's an area which will change over the next few years. I mean, World of Warcraft, it had a huge effect on our genre. It increased the accessibility of the genre and introduced a whole generation of new players to MMOs. And I think for the last 4 or 5 years, it's been safe to say the industry didn't quite know where to place itself on the kind of scale between accessibility and challenge. And a lot of games have struggled with that kind of discussion of, you know, we want 12 million players against, well, we want to make really interesting systems that aren't necessarily as accessible as something that's going to get 12 million players. And personally, I think we'll end up seeing an MMO space that will fragment a little, and I really hope that we see more kind of mid-range development games. You know, right now the MMOs that come out, they tend to be very expensive, larger scale games that are costing tens of millions of dollars. And hopefully, I think as we move forward, I think James mentioned earlier, as our platforms get better and we have the technology pre-built and the infrastructure, we are going to be able to produce MMOs for less money as well, and on shorter development cycles, which means that we should, hopefully, be able to innovate more and experiment more, and mean that we can take, you know, a smaller risk and make this game that might be a bit more niche and a bit more hardcore. You know, I think all of us here on the panel would love to make games that challenged us and inspired us in the same way that the original games kind of inspired us to be here. But likewise, you know, on the other side of the coin, I think there'll be people who will be here in 10 years' time in our place who were inspired by World of Warcraft. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, and I think we'll see both the big blockbuster $200 million games that will be aiming for accessibility, and the small 5 million games that might be aiming for more niche, hardcore type of audiences.
Yeah, I think the line between challenging and frustrating is very thin, and that's, you know, the best designers are able to walk that line and, you know, understand when to, you know, push and when to pull. But I think in general, like, there's, you know, something we're doing is we're going to be front loading, you know, our game with a very challenging instance at the beginning, and then kind of taking it away. So it's almost a cue from a lot of the single player games. You see, you know, God of War kind of go through this. You know, you're climbing Mount Olympus, you're fighting a Zeus, you're the biggest badass in the world. You know, he kicks your ass, throws you off. and you start back at the beginning, and then you can gradually learn back up. But you kind of got a taste of what the challenge is and how difficult it is. And so that's one way we're trying to show where we're at, but also still have the accessibility and learning curve for the more casual player to kind of get hooked on what makes your game so great.
So to me, I mean, these games are just so big that they're both easy and difficult. You find your own place in them. You find your own difficulty. I've said it in the last question. I'm gonna say it again. Like, the only thing that matters is if the game is fun. We keep talking about all these other things, but at the end of the day, I log into our game. I log into games because I want to play them, not because of any other reason. So even if it's easy but I'm having fun, it doesn't really matter. And if it's hard and I'm having fun, it doesn't matter either. The most important thing is those challenges are going to be found with a game this big anywhere. So just make sure that the players are enjoying themselves and they're going to keep playing.
So one of the things I find is a good way to design for that is you need to have the ability for players to play through your entire game and not be the greatest player ever. So you have to give them that path. But you have to encourage them to try out the more difficult content. And a lot of MMOs have that more difficult content, the dungeons that require more team play. And so what you do in the design is you try to encourage players to group up, to start doing some group content that's a little more difficult and requires some organization. And then, by the time they reach the end game and you have some of your most difficult content, your raids, those are the things that kind of challenge them the most. Though it would be cool if someone, maybe developed a Demon Souls MMO. That would be great. Hardcore enough.
Yeah, me either. But I'm our game's very similar to Matt's, where the challenge really comes into the muscle memory, but we also have the AI, and the challenge is certainly there on both sides. But our goal is, like you said, encourage grouping, but not force grouping. We're going for that shooter market, and we want them to play together, and we want them to want to play together, but we really don't want to force them to play together. Yeah, I think difficulties dependent on the market you're going for. We're going for much more accessible.
I think it can get to be a dangerous conversation sometimes when you talk about difficulty or complexity equaling fun. It's a conversation. So I heard the thinly veiled undertone to your question was I played EverQuest and I was really a tough guy, and you played WoW and you were a sissy, which is where I was for that. I put off playing Warcraft for years because it was Care Bear. It was way too easy, and then I played it and realized that I was an idiot. There was depth and there was complexity to it. It was very easy to get into, very difficult to master, and that seems to me. Think about it, EVE Online. I mean, you have to have multiple degrees from MIT to log in. And listen, they have as hardcore, as ardent, as passionate a fan base. You can only dream of having players that committed to your IP, but it's a different game, and to get that into the mass market, and I think you're going to see development times and budgets dictate complexity, because if you're going to spend $120 million on a game, you're not going to do it to get 30,000 players. You're going to be doing it to reach as large an audience as you can. And a lot of times, I heard this as a player, I heard it often, and now getting to be on the other side of the fence is that a lot of times players don't actually want what they're asking for. I participate in Fires of Heaven and post and talk to some of the most jaded human beings on the planet on that forum, and they're all trying for the permadeath days and the 4-hour corpse runs, which were fun. In the context, they were fun because you had nothing else to do. I get it. I can remember all of my memories of EQ are fond ones, but when I look at there was no competition. There was no one else, there was nothing else to do, so it had to be fun, and it was. Nowadays, players won't do that anymore. I mean, not a large segment of players anyway, a meaningful group, and so